How's it going, guys? Welcome to the Basic Expert channel. My name is John. I like to talk about tabletop role-playing games, give advice for game masters, review products, just talk about the hobby in general, both good and bad. Today's video, I wanted to talk about how I ruined D&D for my wife. Granted, let me preface this by saying that my wife was probably never going to like Dungeons & Dragons to begin with. She is not a patient woman in a lot of ways. She is, but not in games. Games, she has no patience for. She wants to play Cards Against Humanity, quick social games that, a round or two, the game is over in 15 to 30 minutes. If a game lasts for 4 hours or 5 hours, she's not interested in it at all. So, a lot of this is my fault in this story that I'm about to tell you, but a lot of it was, I was doomed from the start. So, my wife, though, ironically enough, is the one that got me into this hobby in the first place. So, and this will be a kind of sort of a story about my introduction into the hobby as well, and how I made a bunch of mistakes that I, looking back and while I was doing it, realized I made a mistake. And I'm going to attempt to learn from these mistakes. So, back when 4th edition had come out, my wife and I were dating. We weren't married yet. And I had always been talking about how, I grew up in a very evangelical home, and I never got the chance to play Dungeons & Dragons because in the 90s, when I was a kid, I grew up in the 90s, the Satanic Panic was still in full swing, at least at the very evangelical church that I went to. And so I wasn't allowed to watch things like Scooby-Doo because there were ghosts. I would sneak and watch it and then wonder, why am I not allowed to watch this? It turns out every single time that it's not a real ghost, it's some guy in a costume. I wasn't allowed to watch Ninja Turtles because they lived in the sewer, and somehow that was satanic and evil. My parents did let me watch Star Wars and Batman. I was a huge Batman fan as a kid, and my parents got lots of frowns just for that. I think they wanted to let me watch all these things. They wanted to let me have a childhood, but the church said no. Thankfully, my parents have realized the error of their ways. They've since apologized to my brothers and I for depriving us of stuff. It would suck to go to school and hear your friends talking about Ninja Turtles, and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not allowed to watch that. So, yeah. Anyway, so that's some context for that. Why I missed out. I would have totally been into this hobby in the 90s when I was a kid, but I missed out on it because crazy Satanic Panic evangelical parents. So, fast forward to when 4th edition comes out, and I'm just like, the hobby hadn't exploded yet, obviously. It was bigger than, maybe it had been before, but it wasn't what it is now. And so it was still kind of an obscure thing that, you had to look for. And so I mentioned a couple offhand remarks, I think I want to buy some of the D&D rule books and just learn how to play. I think it'd be a fun game to learn how to play. I've always wanted to and was never either allowed to or, but now I'm an adult and I can do whatever I want. So for Christmas, she bought me the Red Box Starter Set, and I loved it. And then after that, I bought some of the core rule books. And, I didn't know any better. So before you flame me in the comments, I didn't know any better. I didn't know what role-playing really was. I didn't know what gaming was. I just knew that I wanted to try it. And D&D is the biggest, even then, was the biggest, most brand of it. If it was still, even then, associated with D&D is tabletop role-playing games. And so I had a blast. There was many game nights where my friends and I, because I just introduced my friends to it, I was like, look, guys, I got D&D. Who wants to come over and I'll run a game for you guys? And moving forward, there were many late game nights where, the guys would come over at 5 and we'd play till 4 in the morning, almost 12-hour games. It was ridiculous. And that would happen every other weekend. And we had lots of fun. with my ridiculous, very combat heavy games, because that's what 4E was really all about, but skirmishing. But we had lots of fun. And I ran 4E up until 5E came out, and then I made the switch to 5E and relatively enjoyed it. And, you know, we get to the point, or I've talked about it before, where I kind of fell out of love with 5E and, you know, found the old school Renaissance and revival and retro clones and stuff like that. So the first game, though, I ever ran, so my wife bought me the Red Box starter set for 4th edition. So again, not knowing the blasphemy of how that looked back then with that image and that iconography on the box of 4th edition, I didn't know any better. I thought it was cool. But I ran a game night. I invited a bunch of friends over, and we ate food and we played D&D. And I invited too many people. That was my first mistake. I had way too many people playing this game. I think I had like 8 to 9 people at the table, maybe 10. It was too many. So combat was a slog, and people were getting bored waiting for their turn. So that was the first mistake I realized. I'm like, oh, this is a game for like 2 to 4 people, in my opinion. I think that's like the sweet spot. I like 3 to 4 players at the table. I think 6 and 7 starts getting to be a little too much for me to want to deal with and handle, and maintain everyone's interest in the game. But so that was the first thing I learned, is that is way too many people. But my wife was playing, and she was playing an elf ranger, I believe, and they were fighting some wolves. The party was fighting some wolves, and she's like, I want to start a fire. And me, being this is the first game I've ever ran, not knowing what I'm doing, obviously I invited 10 people to this thing. What the heck was I thinking, you know? Me being noob me, not knowing anything about anything, and not knowing what I'm doing, responded with, no, you can't do that. That right there was my first mistake. And I think it's the advice that I want to give to DMs and game masters out there is, I said no because it didn't make sense to me. I'm like, you're in the middle of combat. Like, how are you going to have the time to like get your fire starting tools out and start a fire? You don't even have any like, do you even have any tinder? Do you even have like wood? What's your end game with the fire? And I just said no. And it made my wife and girlfriend at the time mad, because I said no. She wanted to start a fire, and I said no. And I think the approach that I learned at this point was that I can't just outright say no to a player. This is a game about dialogue in a lot of instances. The player says they want to do something. The DM doesn't say no, but they're like, if you're going to do that, this would be the consequences. That's kind of been my approach since then. And the thing that I learned from that situation. So I think, and I don't know, I would love to game with my wife. I would love to have her sit at the table and play with us, but I don't think she's interested. And it's hard with a kid. You know, we have a almost 2-year-old, and so it's not the easiest thing to keep an eye on her. It has to be after the child goes to sleep when we play. Otherwise, who's watching the baby? But so I don't know. And again, my wife is not very much into games that take forever, and most game sessions, you know, they go for 3 to 4 or 5 hours sometimes, and that's the way I like it. But you know, it is what it is. So what I learned, though, what I would have done if I could go back in time and slap first time Dungeon Master John on the back of the head and tell him to stop wearing his rear end as a hat because it's so far crammed up there. What I would do is I'd say, like, don't say no. Ask them, well, okay, the first question I'd ask is, do you have the means of starting a fire? Can you look in your inventory? What are you, in your equipment and what you're carrying? Do you have the means of starting a fire? Her response probably would have been, yeah, I do. I have a fire starting kit and some tinder. Okay, cool. You have the stuff you need to start. The next thing I would decide would be like, would there be anything around you to start a fire with? And I'd probably give that to her. I'd be like, you guys are in the middle of the woods fighting wolves. Like, you could probably reach down and there's probably a stick down there. I'll give that to you. That should have been my next response. But The next thing is obviously combat rounds. You know, you have like 6 to 10 seconds passing between each round as it goes around. It takes a long time to start a fire. I don't know if any of you ever tried starting a fire. We don't know if the wood that she's picking up off the ground is wet, maybe a little damp, right? And she's not using any magical means of lighting the wood. So that would have been my response. And I think with most players, that goes over better, right? Because you're not telling them no, but you are setting limitations on what they're doing. And they might be like, oh wait, never mind. If I have to like light this stick on fire, and you know, it's not going to be instantaneous. It's going to take like a turn or two before like I get the flame going and the fire's going, and then I can bat off the wolves with the flaming stick. You know, that's not worth it. I'm better off just like getting my sword or bow out and trying to, you know, smash the wolves with that. And so you still get the no. I still get the response that I had, like, no, that doesn't make any sense. You don't have the time to do that. But you don't just tell them no. You let them come to that conclusion on their own. Like, oh, wait, that's not actually a good tactical decision right now. Because while I'm sitting here trying to light a stick on fire, everyone else is getting bitten by wolves. And I should probably be helping in the combat situation with that rather than trying to light the stick on fire that, you know, probably isn't going to really do all that much in the end. So that's what I learned from that situation, and that's how I ruined Dungeons and Dragons for my wife. She never wanted to play ever again after that. I don't think it helped that my middle brother was playing in that game, and then spilt a big glass of wine on top of her, like all over her shoulder, and it got like all over the floor and on the seats and everything. It was a mess. That whole night was a mess. We had fun. I think everyone had fun. Everyone said they had fun. They had never done anything like that before. And they're all, you know, new people are always fascinated with the funky shaped dice and stuff like that. So it was fun. But I don't think I'd ever do it that way again. That was the complete wrong way to do. And again, I potentially spoiled D&D for my wife because I said no. So that's the lesson I learned. But what's a situation, please sound off in the comments and make me feel a little better about myself, you know. What's a situation where you just like totally dropped the ball as a DM? I mean, granted, I have a lot of things in this story that I told. It was the first game I'd ever dungeon mastered, and I made mistakes before the game even started. First of all, being that many people at the table, inviting that many people. I should have invited people that could maybe watch us play, because I don't think that many people are actually interested in actually playing. But what are your stories? What are ways in which, as a DM, you did something and then later you're like, I screwed up? Anyways, until the next video, guys, I'll talk to you guys later. Please check out Cowpunchers. Link is in the video description to purchase my game. Rules light, cowboy western, role-playing game. Uses D6s only, really simple. 25 pages, and those 25 pages include a little starter scenario for you as well. And I'm also taking feedback on that, so there will be some corrections to the PDF eventually, as I just get enough people suggesting things that I should change before I make that update. So please check that out. And also use my Drive-Thru RPG link, affiliate link in the video description and in the pinned comment. Helps support the channel. Helps me get products to review and tell you what cool, interesting stuff is out there. So until next time, guys, I'll talk to you later. Don't ruin other people's experience at the table. I'll see you later. Bye.